It was a typical Friday night at Jake's Pizza, where I'd been working as a delivery driver for the past 6 months. The neon sign flickered outside, casting an otherworldly glow on the rain-slicked streets. I was about to clock out when my manager, Mike, called me over. "Hey, got one last delivery for you," he said, holding out a steaming pizza box. "It's a bit out of our usual range, but the customer's a big tipper." I hesitated, glancing at the clock. It was already past midnight, and I had plans to meet up with friends, but the promise of a generous tip was too tempting to pass up. "Where to?" I asked, taking the box. Mike handed me a slip of paper with an address scrawled on it. Old Millbrook Road, just past the abandoned steel mill. A chill ran down my spine. Old Millbrook Road was notorious for its isolation and the countless urban legends surrounding it. I'd heard whispers of ghostly apparitions and unexplained disappearances, but I'd always dismissed them as campfire stories. As I climbed into my beat-up Honda Civic, a sense of unease settled over me. The GPS struggled to locate the address, and I found myself relying on the vague directions Mike had given me. The further I drove from the city lights, the darker and more oppressive the night became. The road twisted and turned through dense woods, the trees looming over me like silent sentinels. My headlights barely penetrated the thick fog that had settled over the landscape. As I approached the old steel mill, its decrepit silhouette rising from the mist, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Little did I know, this delivery would be unlike any other I'd ever made, and it would change my life forever. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spotted a dilapidated mailbox with faded numbers matching the address. I turned onto a narrow, overgrown driveway that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. My headlights illuminated a decrepit Victorian house, its windows dark and shutters hanging askew. As I killed the engine, an oppressive silence engulfed me. The air felt thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. I grabbed the pizza box and approached the porch, each step causing the old wood to groan ominously beneath my feet. I raised my hand to knock, but hesitated. Something felt off. The house appeared abandoned, with no signs of life or recent habitation. Cobwebs adorned the corners of the porch, and a thick layer of dust covered everything in sight. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vast emptiness surrounding me. "Pizza delivery!" No response came from within the house. I was about to turn back when a sudden gust of wind sent a chill down my spine. The trees around the property seemed to whisper, their leaves rustling in an unsettling rhythm. That's when I heard it, a voice, barely audible, coming from the shadows to my left. "Leave the food and go." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Who's there?" I stammered, squinting into the darkness. No one answered, but I could feel eyes watching my every move. Swallowing hard, I placed the pizza box on the porch railing. My instincts screamed at me to run, but curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. I took a cautious step towards the source of the voice. "Hello, I need you to sign for the delivery," I said, my voice trembling. Suddenly, the porch light flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the overgrown yard. In that brief moment of illumination, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood at the edge of the light's reach, tall, gaunt, and impossibly still. Its limbs were too long, its fingers tapering into sharp points. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Or rather, the lack of one. Where features should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless expanse of pale skin. The light went out as quickly as it had come on, plunging me back into darkness. I stumbled backward, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. "Leave now," the voice rasped, closer this time. "While you still can." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, not daring to look back. The gravel crunched under my feet as I sprinted towards my car, fumbling with the keys. As I reached for the car door handle, a cold, bony hand clamped down on my shoulder. I let out a scream that seemed to echo through the entire forest. Spinning around, I came face to face with the entity, its blank visage mere inches from mine. "You shouldn't have come here," it hissed, its grip tightening painfully. In a moment of pure adrenaline-fueled panic, I lashed out, my fist connecting with the creature's featureless face. To my horror, my hand sank into its flesh as if it were made of cold putty. The entity recoiled, releasing its grip on me. I wrenched the car door open and threw myself inside, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the loose gravel. As I sped down the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The entity stood in the middle of the road, its elongated arm reaching out towards me. The trees on either side of the driveway seemed to bend inward, their branches clawing at my car. I floored the accelerator, my car fishtailing as I hit the main road. The fog grew thicker, obscuring my vision, but I didn't dare slow down. Strange whispers filled the car, and shadows danced at the edge of my peripheral vision. It wasn't until I saw the familiar glow of the city lights that I finally allowed myself to breathe. I pulled over to the side of the road, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. Days turned into weeks, but I couldn't shake the memory of that night. I quit my job at the pizza place, unable to bring myself to make another delivery. My friends grew concerned as I became a shell of my former self, jumping at shadows and refusing to leave my apartment after dark. 1 month after the incident, a package arrived at my door. There was no return address, just my name scrawled in an eerily familiar handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was the pizza box I had left on the porch that night, now weathered and stained. Attached to it was a note that made my blood run cold. "You forgot your tip." As I stared at the box, unable to move, I heard a faint whisper, the same raspy voice from that nightmarish encounter. "See you soon," it said, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I've moved 3 times since then, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting. Because deep down, I know the truth. Whatever I encountered that night isn't done with me. And someday, when I least expect it, I'll hear that whisper again, telling me it's time for my last delivery. It was just another night shift at Pete's Pizza, or so I thought. The clock had barely struck midnight when the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the silence of the empty restaurant. I picked up, stifling a yawn. "Pete's Pizza, open late to satisfy your cravings. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end was frail, almost a whisper. "Oh, thank goodness you're open. I'm terribly hungry, dear. Could you bring me a large pepperoni pizza?" Something about the voice sent a chill down my spine, but I shook it off. It was probably just the late hour playing tricks on my mind. I took down the address, 13 Willow Street, and assured the caller I'd be there in 30 minutes. As I prepared the pizza, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. Willow Street was on the outskirts of town, home to some of the oldest houses in the area. Most of them had been abandoned for years. The drive was eerie. Streetlights flickered and died as I passed, plunging the road into darkness. The full moon cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, and a thick fog began to roll in. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. Finally, I arrived at 13 Willow Street. The house loomed before me, a decrepit Victorian mansion straight out of a horror movie. Paint peeled from its weathered boards, and most of the windows were boarded up. But a single light shone from an upstairs window, warm and inviting. I hesitated, pizza box in hand. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to drive away and never look back. But I had a job to do. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the creaking porch steps and knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Little did I know, I was about to make a delivery that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The door creaked open, and I found myself face to face with an elderly woman. Her wispy white hair framed a face etched with deep wrinkles, and her eyes were milky with cataracts. Yet they seemed to pierce right through me. "Oh, bless you, dear," she croaked, her bony fingers reaching for the pizza box. "I've been waiting so long." As I handed over the pizza, our hands brushed. Her skin was ice cold, sending shivers down my spine. The interior of the house was dark, save for the flickering light of what looked like candles. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. "Would you like to come in?" she asked, a strange gleam in her eyes. It's awfully cold out there. I politely declined, explaining I had more deliveries. It was a lie, but something about this place felt wrong. As I turned to leave, she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered, "I get so lonely here." I gently pulled away, mumbling an apology. As I hurried back to my car, I could feel her eyes boring into my back. The moment I slammed the car door, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Driving away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The old woman stood on the porch, the pizza box clutched to her chest, watching me leave. As I turned the corner, I could have sworn I saw her figure flicker like a faulty TV signal. I shook my head, blaming my imagination. But the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Something wasn't right about that house or that woman. The next morning, I couldn't shake off the events of the previous night. The old woman's face haunted my dreams, her cold touch lingering on my skin. Desperate for answers, I decided to do some research on 13 Willow Street. What I found chilled me to the bone. The local library's archives revealed a dark history. The house had been abandoned for over 50 years, following a series of mysterious deaths. The last known occupant was Elizabeth Blackwood, an elderly recluse who died under bizarre circumstances in 1972. My hands shook as I stared at the grainy newspaper photo. It was her, the same woman I'd delivered pizza to last night. But that was impossible. She'd been dead for decades. Digging deeper, I uncovered a pattern of strange occurrences around the house. Every few years, there were reports of lights in the windows, of an old woman seen wandering the grounds. But whenever authorities investigated, they found nothing but an empty, decaying house. The most recent incident had been just last year. A group of teenagers dared to spend the night in the haunted house, fled in terror, babbling about a hungry ghost and the smell of rotting flesh. As I read, a chill crept up my spine. I remembered the old woman's words, "I've been waiting so long," and that strange flicker as I drove away. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A text from my boss. "Another order for 13 Willow Street tonight. You okay to take it?" My finger hovered over the reply button, my mind racing. Should I go back, or was I walking into a nightmare? Against my better judgment, I found myself driving back to 13 Willow Street that night. The pizza box sat beside me, a quiet accusation. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was just a prank or a misunderstanding. As I approached the house, my headlights illuminated a "for sale" sign I hadn't noticed before. The realtor's name and number were faded, barely legible. The house looked even more decrepit in the harsh glare, like a corpse exposed to daylight. I parked and walked up to the door, my heart pounding. This time, no one answered my knock. The windows were dark, the house silent. After a few minutes, I tried the door handle. To my surprise, it turned easily. "Hello," I called out, stepping inside. "Pizza delivery." The floorboards creaked under my feet, dust swirling in the beam of my flashlight. The interior was a mess of cobwebs and broken furniture. It looked like no one had lived here for years. In the living room, I froze. There, on a moldy coffee table, sat the pizza box from last night. It was untouched, a perfect circle of grease seeping through the cardboard. A cold draft brushed past me, carrying a whisper, "I'm so hungry, dear." I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. In the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of something, a flicker of movement, a flash of pale skin and sunken eyes. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. Silence answered me, broken only by the rapid beating of my own heart. Panic overwhelmed me. I dropped the pizza and ran, not stopping until I was back in my car, tires screeching as I sped away. But even as the house faded in my rearview mirror, I couldn't escape the feeling that something had followed me. Over the next few weeks, strange things began to happen. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, feeling a cold presence in my room. The smell of decay would waft through my apartment at odd hours. Sometimes, I'd catch glimpses of a withered figure in reflections or shadows. Unable to shake the haunting, I returned to 13 Willow Street one last time, determined to uncover the truth. The house stood silent, but as I approached, I noticed something odd. In one of the upstairs windows, a faint light flickered. Heart racing, I entered the house. As I climbed the creaking stairs, I heard a soft voice. "I've been so lonely, dear, so hungry." In the upstairs room, I found her, Elizabeth Blackwood, or what was left of her. A ghostly figure, trapped between worlds, forever seeking companionship and sustenance she could never truly have. She reached out to me, her eyes filled with an eternity of loneliness and hunger. "Stay with me," she pleaded. In that moment, I understood the true horror of her existence. And I realized that by acknowledging her, by entering her domain, I had unwittingly tied my fate to hers. As her cold fingers brushed my cheek, I knew I'd never truly leave 13 Willow Street. Part of me would always be there, bound to the hungry ghost, feeding her endless hunger for connection. Remember, some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. It was just past midnight when I pulled up to the dilapidated apartment complex. The flickering streetlights cast eerie shadows across the crumbling facade. As a veteran delivery driver, I'd seen my fair share of sketchy neighborhoods, but something about this place made my skin crawl. I double-checked the address on my phone, apartment 13B. Of course, it had to be 13. With a sigh, I grabbed the greasy paper bag and made my way up the creaky stairs. The hallway was dimly lit, the wallpaper peeling like old scabs. As I approached 13B, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of sickly yellow light spilling out. I knocked tentatively. "Hello? Food delivery." The door swung open, revealing a tall, gaunt man with sunken eyes and a smile that was far too wide for his face. "Ah, finally," he said, his voice raspy. "I've been waiting for you." Something in his tone made my heart race. I held out the bag, eager to complete the transaction and leave, but he just stood there, grinning. "Why don't you come in while I get your tip?" he suggested, that unnerving smile never faltering. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but before I could react, his bony hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. He pulled me inside, and the door slammed shut behind me with a finality that chilled me to the bone. As my eyes adjusted to the dim interior, I froze in horror. The apartment was a nightmare come to life. The walls were plastered with photos of people, delivery drivers, judging by their uniforms. Each picture was crossed out with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. "Do you like my collection?" the man asked, his grin widening impossibly. "You're not the first to grace my humble abode, but you might be the last I need." I stumbled backward, my back hitting the closed door. My hand fumbled for the knob, but it wouldn't budge. The man chuckled, a sound like bones rattling. "Oh, don't bother. They all try that. It's quite amusing, really." My eyes darted around, desperately seeking an escape route. That's when I noticed the pile of familiar objects in the corner. Phones, car keys, delivery bags from various restaurants. With a sickening lurch in my stomach, I realized these belonged to the other drivers in the photos. What do you want from me?" I managed to choke out. The man's eyes gleamed with a predatory light. "Want? Oh, my dear delivery person, I want everything. Your fear, your desperation, your very essence. You see, I have a very particular appetite, and you're all part of my midnight snack." As he spoke, his form seemed to shift and contort, growing larger, more monstrous. I realized with dawning terror that whatever stood before me now was far from human. The creature that had once resembled a man towered over me, its skin rippling and stretching like melted wax. Its mouth, now a gaping maw lined with razor-sharp teeth, still held that terrifying grin. "What are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. It laughed, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I am hunger incarnate," it rasped, "a being as old as time, feeding on the fear and flesh of unsuspecting humans. And you, my friend, are the final piece in my centuries-long feast." As it spoke, tendrils of darkness began to seep from the walls, writhing and reaching towards me. I could hear whispers, the agonized voices of its previous victims, begging for release. "You see," the creature continued, "every 100 years, I must consume 99 souls to maintain my power. You, lucky number 99, will complete this cycle." I frantically searched my pockets, hoping for something, anything that could serve as a weapon. My hand closed around my car keys, the metal warm and familiar in my palm. The creature noticed my movement and chuckled. "Oh, please, do try to fight. It makes the meal so much more satisfying." In that moment, as the tendrils of darkness closed in and the monster loomed over me, I knew I had to act. It was fight or die, and I wasn't ready to become this thing's final course. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged forward, my car keys clutched between my fingers like makeshift brass knuckles. I slammed my fist into what I hoped was a vulnerable spot on the creature's twisted form. To my surprise, the keys sank deep into its flesh with a sickening squelch. The monster let out an ear-piercing shriek, recoiling in pain and fury. "You dare!" it roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of the building. I didn't wait for it to recover. I ran, ducking under its flailing limbs, desperately searching for an exit. The apartment seemed to have transformed into a nightmarish labyrinth, doors appearing and disappearing, corridors stretching endlessly. Behind me, I could hear the creature's enraged howls and the sound of furniture being smashed as it gave chase. The whispers of its victims grew louder, more frantic, as if urging me on. I rounded a corner and found myself face to face with a mirror. But my reflection wasn't alone. Behind me, I could see the spectral forms of the other 98 victims, their eyes pleading. Suddenly, I understood. The keys in my hand grew hot, glowing with an otherworldly light. The spirits of the victims had imbued them with power, the power to end this centuries-long nightmare. I spun around, facing the approaching monster, the key raised high. "It ends here," I declared, my voice steadier than I felt. "No more victims, no more fear." The creature lunged at me, its maw wide open, ready to swallow me whole. But I stood my ground, the glowing key held before me like a sword. As the monster's teeth were about to close around me, I thrust the key forward, plunging it deep into the creature's throat. An explosion of light erupted from the point of contact, so bright it was blinding. The monster's shriek of agony was deafening, shaking the entire building. I could feel the structure crumbling around us, but I held on, pushing the key deeper. Cracks of light began to spread across the creature's body, growing wider and brighter. The whispers of the victims grew to a crescendo, their combined voices chanting in a language I didn't understand but somehow comprehended. "We are free." With a final, earth-shattering roar, the monster exploded into a million points of light. The force of the blast threw me back, and I braced myself for impact. But instead of hard floor, I felt myself falling through empty space. I jolted awake with a gasp, finding myself in my car outside the apartment complex. The building stood silent and dark, showing no signs of the nightmare I'd just experienced. As I sat there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had happened, my phone pinged. It was a message from the delivery app. "Order canceled. Return to base." I've never been so relieved to lose a tip in my life. As I drove away, I swore I could hear distant whispers of gratitude on the wind. One thing's for sure, I'm never doing midnight deliveries again.